What's up, guys? So this is a series I've been wanting to do on my channel for a long time, and when somebody commented on my last video about bringing it up, I thought this is the time to start it. So what I'd like to do is call this the Canon Film Guide. Now I want to go over in these episodes 3 Canon films that I think is highly worth your time. And I'm going to start this out with some classics, because the thing about Canon Films was they were a company that had a number of owners, but the 2 owners that we're going to really focus on with the storytelling and the movies we'll pick are Menahem Golan and Jorn Globus. Now these guys were trailblazers who did things in the movie industry that were out of this world at the time. For instance, they would make movies and have posters and raise money for the movies with stars on the front of the poster without even getting the approval from the actor to be in the film yet. They did this to raise money beforehand and sell foreign. It was absolutely insane back in the day. Usually you get the approval from actors, you start raising money, and then you try to get the film made. They would make money for movies that didn't even have approved actors yet. It was just absolute insanity. But they blazed the trail and made movies in those decades, the 70s and 80s, that absolutely captivated audiences and pissed off the big studios. They became a big player themselves, but eventually imploded. We're going to chronicleize 3 movies in each episode of titles that I really love and you should check out. And some of them you might have already seen, but we're going to talk about it through the lens of Canon Films. So the first Canon film I'd like to bring up is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Obviously, us as horror fans, we love this film. The relationship by this point with Canon Films and Tobe Hooper was not a great one. Tobe came on to do films like Life Force, which was a massive big movie that did not do very well, and he had a history of being on heavy drugs at the time. Tobe has talked about being, I think, a cocaine addict and all kinds of stuff, and that film really shows it. It's all over the place. Life Force will be a movie we'll talk about soon. He also did a movie called Invaders from Mars, and at this point, Tobe's relationship with Golan and Globus was not a great one. Both films did not do as good as they could have, and also the theme and style of the films were not something that they were expecting. They all wanted the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the great horror film from Tobe Hooper. They wanted that for the 80s. So by the time they decided to do Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 with Tobe, they thought, okay, let's do this. But interestingly enough, as dailies started coming in and things like this, Golan and Globus were not happy. They wanted the first movie, and they were getting was this really funny dark comedy film. As a matter of fact, Carolyn Williams has talked about how horrible they were to Tobe during this time. They would pull money from him, then give him a little bit, then pull it back. The conditions for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 were not a good one. And it's a miracle the film came out as good as it did. This would also be the end of the relationship with Golan and Globus with Tobe Hooper. And we don't really know how successful this film was. Tobe has talked about what it should have made, what it did make, and things like that. But one of the brilliant things that we did see happen with Tobe Hooper during this time was the poster change that we saw. Here is the original theatrical poster for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which I'm a big fan of. I always loved that look of Leatherface breaking through the door with the chainsaw. During this time, John Hughes films like Breakfast Club were massive successes, and Tobe saw an opportunity to do something crazy. He made this poster, and the story goes that Bill Moseley saw this poster on Sunset Boulevard or somewhere in California, this massive banner that advertisers were okay to put up because they didn't think it was a crazy horror movie. Despite the fact that it's called Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 still, I find it a little odd that advertisers were still like, oh yeah, this looks like a fun movie. It's still called Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, but nonetheless, that poster change would be an iconic change and something that horror fans still love till this day. So Canon Films' relationship with Tobe was not a great one. Be ready, because next episode we're definitely going to chronicleize either Invaders from Mars or Life Force, which are 2 insane films from Tobe Hooper, and certainly some that don't get the highest register in his catalog from fans, but Life Force is, in my opinion, one of his best films he's done. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is, in my opinion, one of the best Tobe's done. Awesome movie. Alright guys, so the next film I'd like to talk about is one of the best non-franchise slashers, and that movie is 10 to Midnight. Now we talked about this in my non-franchise slasher list, but the thing about 10 to Midnight is it's such a great story and thing that Canon did. Now Canon would take actors that were seemingly past their prime sometimes and try to make them reinvented stars again. Charles Bronson would be a big part of the Canon film group during this time, with films like 10 to Midnight and other classics like Death Wish 2 and 3, which can't wait to get into those. But the story goes with 10 to Midnight is what I was talking about earlier. Menahem was a crazy son of a bitch. There's just no other way to do it. He had no problem firing people right on set. There's stories of him being on a plane filming stuff where it's excruciatingly hot with a bunch of people, and this woman said she was about to pass out, and he seemingly looked at her and said, "Do the scene, then you can pass out." He was crazy. There's even a story of Menahem robbing food from an intern down on the second floor for his lunch and bringing it upstairs when an actor was coming to visit so he had something to give him to eat. Absolute insanity. But one of the things that's really cool about 10 to Midnight is the story of how they raised the money for it. They went to a Cannes Film Festival or something like that and had trades and things to getting ready to try to sell the film foreign. Well, on the poster was Charles Bronson for 10 to Midnight. We had a title, we had an actor, but we didn't even have a script. Not only that, we didn't have the approval from Charles Bronson. But they did secure the funding because they knew that that was the way to sell movies. Have a good poster, have a good theme, and you could let it rip. Fortunately, after that, Charles Bronson did agree to sign on to do the film, and then we got the film 10 to Midnight. Now, we talked about this in the non-franchise slashers, but again, if you haven't seen this film, it's riveting good stuff. The killer in this movie likes to strip down naked when he haunts and stalks his prey. And it's a film that's really crime-driven, somewhat of a mystery, but also just a damn good slasher film. Charles Bronson is also at his best in this movie. 10 to Midnight gets the highest recommendation from me, as I think it is a 5 out of 5 stars for what that kind of film is. It's a classic in the Canon Films Group library, and one of Charles Bronson's best movies. And the third movie I'd like to talk about today, guys, is one of my all-time favorite films. What I consider to be the greatest Canon film ever made. Jean-Claude Van Damme in Bloodsport. Now, Bloodsport is about a character named Frank Dukes. Now, Frank Dukes is a martial artist who makes his way over to China in the underground worlds to fight in a tournament called the Kumite. Now, the Kumite is a violent, legitimate blood sport where people compete from all over the world to become crowned the champion. Now, the significance of this film was how Jean-Claude Van Damme was seemingly at his last gasp to become a movie star. Now, this wasn't the first movie he ever done. There were things he'd done before this. I believe No Retreat, No Surrender was one, but he wasn't able to break through the glass ceiling. There's even a story of Jean-Claude saying that he snuck onto Sylvester Stallone's front lawn in the late 80s and tried to do splits and roundhouse kicks in the front yard trying to beg Stallone for a job. What happened soon was Menahem Golan saw that Van Damme came back to the offices again to try to meet with him, which wasn't the first time, and Van Damme broke down in his office. He said, "I've been giving it everything, I've been pushing, and nothing was happening." And Menahem's heartstrings pulled a little bit. And the story goes that he yelled over to one of the interns and said, "Hey, pull me out some scripts that we have." One of those scripts was Bloodsport. He glanced over it, saw what kind of film it was, and says, "You will be the star in Bloodsport." The rest is history. Bloodsport is one of my all-time favorite films, especially martial arts. Why? There's no trampolines, there's no cables. Bloodsport is all about real athletics. Van Damme is the real deal. And the legends like Balo Young being in this film are absolutely amazing and make this something to be seen, to be believed. The fight scenes in this are absolutely stellar. Everything about this film is just so well done. Some of the acting is a little hokey in the beginning, but once you get past the stuff where he's going to visit the guy that helped him train and we get to China, it is all that and a bag of chips. The legend Balo Young is in this movie as the main villain, and he is one of the most intimidating villains you'll ever see. Bloodsport, in my estimation, is the greatest Canon film ever made, with a legacy that is still enduring till this very day. Not only do I think it's Jean-Claude's best movie, but again, I think it's the best Canon film and one of the best martial arts films. I'd put it up there with Enter the Dragon. So Bloodsport is one that I thought we gotta start this off right and talk about what I think is the best Jean-Claude Van Damme film and one of the best action films. Bloodsport would become a big success, despite the fact that Canon Films at this point was becoming highly in debt, and we wouldn't see too much more of Canon Films. Golem and Globus would then split up and start different companies, but we'll talk about that another day. So those are 3 Canon films that I'd like to talk about today, and if you guys like this series, I'm excited to do more. There are films like Invasion USA, Missing in Action, that we could talk about, but this is one way I wanted to start this off, with one of my favorite films, Bloodsport, going over Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, but talking about it in a different avenue. And of course, Charlie Bronson's run with Canon Films, and 10 to Midnight is a great way to start that off. So here is Volume 1 of the Canon Film Guide, guys. If you've seen these films, please drop your comments below. Let me know your thoughts on them. And certainly, if you're interested in this kind of series, if you let me know down below which one you'd like me to bring up next time in Volume 2, Don't forget about Ninja 3. That's one of the craziest movies ever made. I look forward to making those videos happen. My name's Christian from Planet CHH. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. Please drop a like if you did, and we'll see you guys next time. I want to say thanks to all my amazing Patreon supporters who make Planet CHH possible. For behind-the-scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and more, you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month.